بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله على ما أنعم وله الشكر على ما ألهم والثناء بما قدم، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله كلمة جعل الإخلاص تأويلها، والصلاة والسلام على صاحب الوقار والسكينة المدفون بأرض مدينة أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى آل رسوله المختار الأبرار والأطهار الذين كلامهم نور وأمرهم رشد، وصيتهم التقوى وفعلهم الخير وعادتهم الإحسان وسجيتهم الكرم. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله وعلى بنتك المظلومة المغصوبة. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليك منا جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقالت اخرج عليهن فلما رأينه أكبرنه وقطعنا أيديهن وقلنا حاشا لله ما هذا بشرا إن هذا إلا ملك كريم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. They say one of the students of Ayatollah Baqir al-Sadr in Najf al-Ashraf had asked him, how did you become Shaheed Baqir al-Sadr? How did you become Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr? This student, who now is in Qom, said that Shaheed al-Sadr replied to me by saying, I became Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, that individual who gained ijtihad before he was baligh or close to bulugh, by doing 10% research and reading, but 90% I used to think about what I read and what I researched. In other words, he was telling us that success for him was found in the fact that Shaheed al-Sadr would read little but ponder more on what he read and think more about the things that he had absorbed. In other words, telling us that if we want to be successful, if we want to understand this religion, if we want to gain the depth of this ma'rifah, it is our job as well to, yes, absorb information, read information, take in information, but it is our job to do more thinking and tafkir and pondering over what we undertake and what we absorb in. The information that we take in, it is necessary upon us that we think about this information, that we ponder upon this information. Which is why it was my decision today to inshallah look at a certain verse of Quran. Often youth have this issue. They have come to me and they have come to other people that the Quran, we open this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we open this Quran, When we open this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't feel a connection with this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We find greater connection, for example, in supplications of Amirul Mu'mineen, supplications of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. When we open Quranul Kareem, we are not connected with Quranul Kareem. When we open the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't understand anything from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When people have this problem, there are many barriers which are created between us and understanding the Quran. One of them is that we do not take time to ponder on the verses that we read by looking at the tafsir of this verse. Very simply, if someone, for example, believes that he is not gaining a connection or she is not gaining a connection with Quran al-Kareem, it is their job then to go into the tafsir of this verse, of this Quran, to gain a greater connection with this book. As we understand, I have been given, alhamdulillah, by the dear organizers different topics to speak about. Islamophobia, living in the West. It has never been my habit or my style to take a certain topic and speak about that topic for the whole lecture. So rather, in these 4 nights that we have, you will see inshallah, at the end of these 4 nights, all of these topics inshallah will have been addressed in some way or another within the main topic that inshallah we'll talk about. So every single day inshallah a different topic will be addressed, but the main topics that I have been asked to discuss will inshallah fit in during our discussion somewhere. It has always been my belief that we have other discussions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about Islam, about Quran, about these other things of faith, and inside these other discussions of a social nature inshallah will be found. It was my decision inshallah today to look at one of the verses of Surah Yusuf, the 12th surah of the Quran, verse 31, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالَتْ اخْرُجْ أُخْرُجْ عَلَيْهِمْ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is quoting part of the story of Nabi Yusuf. When Zulaykha, as we know, this story is not a story I want to go into, it's a very long story, you know the story. Zulaykha, as we know, when she tries to deceive Nabi Yusuf by trying to make him perform an act of illicit relationship, Zulaykha, when she is caught by then her husband Amir, and as the Quran says, if the shirt is torn from the back, then Zulaykha is lying, and he is truthful. If the shirt is torn from the front, then he is lying and Zulaykha is truthful. As we know, when Zulaykha is proven to have been guilty of trying to commit this illicit relationship, the people of Misr, the people of Egypt began talking about Zulaykha. That this woman, look at her, she was unable to control herself. What type of person is she? She is part of the royal family. She is part of the government of Egypt. She was unable to control herself in front of this individual, this slave by the name of Yusuf. When Zulaykha hears these women talking about her in this way, what does she do? She invites them to her house, and as the Quran says, each and every single one of them is given a plate, is given an orange, is given a knife. Every single one, a plate, an orange, and a knife. When they began to cut this orange, as we know, قَالَتْ أُخْرُجْ عَلَيْهِمْ, she tells Yusuf, come in front of them. When they saw him, what did they do? أَكْبَرْنَا, they praised his beauty. وَقَطَّعْنَا أَيْدِيَهُنْ, they began cutting their fingers instead of what? Instead of the orange. And they said, حَاشَا لِلَّهِ, how great is this Allah that has created someone like this? مَا هَذَا بَشْرًا, this is not a human being. إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا مَلَكٌ كَرِيمٌ, this is only a noble angel. Inshallah, our topic tonight is to look at this verse and see how this verse contains issue of theology, contains issues of social science and social issues, and contains a variety of different issues with regards to our faith. And therefore tonight's lecture inshallah is entitled, and when they saw the beauty, they began to cut their fingers. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. If someone was to ponder on these verses, they would find that any verse of the Quran opens so many new doors of ma'rifah for them. This verse, for example, when we looked at this verse, when Zulaykha calls these people and gives them the fruit, and when they see Yusuf, they cut their fingers instead of the fruit, the first thing to ask about this verse is, how does Zulaykha know that if the fruit is put in front of them, they will cut their fingers instead of the fruit? Does she have ilm al-ghayb, for example, knowledge of the unseen, that she knows that they will cut the fingers instead of the fruit? The answer of this is simple. Most probably, this type of experience has happened to Zulaykha many times before with her and the servants in the palace. And therefore she knew that as it has happened so many times before, that when they would see Yusuf, they would begin cutting their fingers. She had conviction that this would take place when the women were called into her house for this banquet. One of the questions, one of the very interesting questions that the Mufassirin raise with this verse is that, look, Nabi Yusuf, salamullahi alayhi, has come into this house as a slave. He was made an abd, Zulaykha, and the Amir was the master. When Zulaykha, without any reasoning, unfairly accuses him of committing a sinful act, then when she orders him, why does Nabi Yusuf listen to her order? So she has accused him of doing something he has not done. Of course he has not done it, and it was proved that he has not done it. Why then, when she tells Nabi Yusuf, come out in front of the women, why does Nabi Yusuf listen to her when she orders? Because she has accused Nabi Yusuf, she has tried to dishonor Nabi Yusuf. When then she orders Nabi Yusuf, why does she listen to her order and act upon her command? Now different answers were given by individuals. For example, people said because this was a contract that they had, that he was meant to be the slave and she was meant to be the master, and so he had to listen. No. Nabi Yusuf salamullah alayhi is sahibul ma'rifah. Nabi Yusuf is sahibul nubuwah. He is a Nabi. He is someone who has ma'rifah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was trying to show us and teach us a very important lesson, that Nabi Yusuf was trying to show what is true ubudiyyah. True ubudiyyah and servitude is whatever my master says, I will listen to it and I will act upon it. In other words, by listening to Zulaykha, he was telling us, in the way that I listen to this master of mine, the true abd is that individual who in all cases will listen to that master of ours, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is why when Zulaykha says, "Ukhruj alayhim," come out in front of them, he listens to her, he comes out to show us what true servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually means. True servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that in all occasions, in all circumstances, in all situations, I listen to my master, whatever he may command me. And this is actually, in actual fact, the first discussion about this verse. That this verse told us that Nabi Yusuf was teaching us how to be a true abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the greatest station a person can reach and a greatest title a person can be given is that of abd and slave. And we find many examples of individuals who were successful in their life because of this ubudiyyah that they had. One example of this, if you go to Karbala today, you will find the grave of someone by the name of Sheikh Ahmed ibn Fahd Al-Hilli rahmatullahi alayhi. Sheikh Ahmed ibn Fahd Al-Hilli is that scholar who lived in the 800 AH, so 700, 800 years ago, 600-700 years ago, and he's buried in Karbala, originally from Hilli. Sheikh Ahmed ibn Fahd Al-Hilli, he has a book, for example, Udda. Sheikh Ahmed ibn Fahd Al-Hilli is also said to be the founder. Whether this is true or not, he is said to be the founder of the Hoseine in Karbala. Sheikh Ahmed ibn Fahd Al-Hilli was one of those individuals when the situation in Iraq and Karbala and these areas was so difficult. He was one of those individuals that had a very good relationship with the government and the kingship. The rulers would listen to Sheikh Ahmed ibn Fahd Al-Hilli, they would take his advice on things. He had a very good relationship with the government of the time. And because of this, he was able to spread Shiism in that area. We are told that there was a student in Najm al-Ashraf. Every single person in whichever field he is will have certain people who he is inspired by. If there's someone in business, for example, he has 2 or 3 figures that he is inspired by. He takes these people to be inspiration for him. Every single person in every field will have 2 or 3 role models of that individual. There was a student in Najm al-Ashraf, he said, in the same way, my role model was Ayatollah Sheikh Ahmed ibn Fahd Al-Hilli. I had heard his story, I had heard about his life, I was inspired about his life. I was inspired about the way in which he spread the religion in such a difficult circumstance. And so every Thursday night, when I would travel from Najm al-Ashraf to Karbala al-Muqaddasa for the ziyarah of Imam Hoseine salamullahi alayhi, my coach, the bus I was in, the last stop of this bus would be right in front of the grave of Ahmed ibn Fahd Al-Hilli. So every time I would go to Karbala, I would get off the bus, I would first recite Surah Al-Fatiha and Salah at the grave of Ibn Fahd Al-Hilli, then I would go to Abu al-Fadl Abbas and Imam Hoseine. After 70, 80 times of doing this, every time I went to Karbala, I would do this. After doing this for 70, 80 times, one day I slept and I saw a dream. In this dream of mine, I saw that there's a garden. In this garden, I see Sheikh Mufid, I see Allama Hilli, I see Sheikh Tusi, I see Nasir al-Din Tusi, I see all of the old ulama, all of the new, recent ulama that have passed away. Mutaqaddimin, mutaakhirin, all of them were in this garden. So of course this was a garden in the barzakh stage. All of these ulama were there present. Now I had a special link with who? Ahmad ibn Fahd Hilli. So when I saw that all of the ulama are here in this garden, I asked one of the ulama, I said, where is Sheikh Ahmad ibn Fahd? The one I have a close link to, all of them were there. Allama Hilli was there, Ibn Tawus was there, all of the ulama were there. I said, where is Sheikh Ahmad ibn Fahd? One of them replied by saying, Ahmad ibn Fahd Hilli is not in this garden, he's in the next one. So I wanted all of the ulama in this garden and Ahmad ibn Fahd is somewhere else, so I went to the next one. When I went to the next garden, I saw Nabi Ibrahim, Nabi Isa, Nabi Adam, Nabi Musa, Ishaq, Saleh, Hud, all of these Anbiya were in this garden. I said, they told me he's not in the garden of the ulama. They said he's in the garden of who? The garden of Anbiya. So I asked one of the prophets, I said, is Sheikh Ahmad ibn Fahd Hilli here? He's in this garden? He says, yes, he's with us, he's with the prophets. He says, can you call him? I want to talk to him. So he says, in my dream I saw that Ahmad ibn Fahd was moved forward. Sheikh Ahmad ibn Fahd told me, oh individual, oh student, every single time you recited Surah Al-Hamd at my grave, it reached me. Every single time you recited Hadiyah of Salah, it reached me. He says, Ya Sheikh, all of the ulama are in one grave, you are here in one garden. Why are you here in Barzakh? He said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, throughout all of my life, all of my actions were worthy for me to be in that first garden with other ulama. One thing I used to do in my life, because of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in Barzakh, I will place you with all of the Anbiya. I said, what is this thing that you have done? He said, every single step of my life, whenever I would deal with another individual, whatever I would own, whenever I was dealing in my life, I would always consider myself as an abd and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the owner of every single thing in my life. So if I had clothing, I would take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the owner. If I lived in a house, I would take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the owner. Because every single thing I did in my life as an abd and a servant, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I will raise you in barzakh with anbiya instead of the scholars. And this is what was taught by Nabi Yusuf in this verse. That Nabi Yusuf, when Zulaykha tells him, come out in front of him, he could have said, no, I will not accept. But then he would not be able to teach us the true meaning of ubudiyah. Ubudiyah is that whatever your master tells you, you should reply to. This was the first lesson. Other lessons from this verse dealt with a social nature of the way in which human beings are within societies. Because we are told the women that accused Zulaykha of being very weak, they looked up down against Zulaykha, what type of person are you? You weren't able to control yourself. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested them with the same test, they came out worse than Zulaykha. Because Zulaykha lives with Nabi Yusuf how many times? Every single day, every single hour she sees him in front of her. After many months, for example, after years, then she came to this level where she wanted to commit that relationship. But these individuals, these women, they saw him only once. After seeing him once, after he left, every single one of them wrote a letter or sent their servants to tell Yusuf, all of them are, Yusuf is invited to my house tonight. Every single one of them. After Yusuf had gone, every single one of them wrote a letter or sent their servant, tell Yusuf he is invited to my house today. Ulama say here that all of those women were very easy to criticize Zulaykha when she committed a mistake. As soon as she committed a mistake, all of them began criticizing. What type of woman is she? What type of wretched woman is she? She is unable to control herself. But when they themselves were put in the same test, they fared worse than Zulaykha had fared. In other words, the second point from this verse of Quran is sometimes this mouth of ours moves very quickly. We are very easy to judge other individuals. We are very easy to undermine other individuals. We are very easy to insult other individuals. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from this verse told us that sometimes when your tongue moves in a way it shouldn't, when you say something you shouldn't, Allah will test you in the same way and humiliate you in front of others. Because most of the time in our communities, one person is seen to be done something incorrect. Instead of helping that individual, instead of helping that individual to come out of that sin, what do? We look down upon that individual. Straight away, how can this individual have done this? This verse of Quran showed us those individuals that spend their life looking down at individuals who have done something, Allah will expose their faces in front of the rest of the world. That you look down upon Zulaykha, you and yourself had committed the same thing, wanted to commit the same thing. And this was the second social aspect of this verse. And with regards to this, we are told Nabi Adam, when he came onto this earth, Nabi Adam, we are told, lived for around 250 years. Adam Sabiyullah Salamullah alayhi lived on this earth for around 250 years. 250 years, of course, he had children, they had children, they had children. A very large group of people were there after 200 years. His grandchildren, their grandchildren, their grandchildren. So one of the children of Nabi Adam came to him. Says, "Oh, our father, our children talk to you, our children's children talk to you. You reply very little. You speak very little. Why is it?" Imagine grandchildren, their grandchildren, their children, a whole bunch of people. They speak to you, "Oh Adam, oh our father," you speak to them very little, you reply very little. Nabi Adam Salamullah alayhi says that when Jibreel took me out of the garden onto this earth, after Tarkul Awla, after eating the apple, when Jibreel took me from the garden onto this earth, he said, if you want to get back into that garden of bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَأَقْلِلْ كَلَامَكَ, reduce your speech, automatically Allah will take you back into the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This verse showed us people are very quick to talk, whether it be today on social media or other things. People are very quick to make their opinion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when you make your opinion, if your opinion is incorrect, if you are looking down on individuals, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will expose your face for doing exactly the same thing that you look down on others for. If someone wants to be pious, if someone wants to be in the bounties of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَأَقْلِلْ reduce the amount of speech, because with speech sins flow very easily. We are very quick to judge other individuals, Nabi Isa, for example, Nabi Isa Salamullah alayhi, he told his people, one individual came to him, he says, "I have committed a sin." Proved. Adultery, I have stolen, I have drunken alcohol. Nabi Isa says, under the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to be punished. You have committed this sin, you have to be punished. He told all of the people of the town, come to the center of the town to punish this individual who, for example, has stolen. He stole someone's wealth, he has to be punished. Come to the center of the town to punish this individual. Now people are very quick to judge, people are very quick to punish. People are very quick to look down on individuals. All of them came. All of them came. When there is fitna or something like this going on, people will gather very quickly. All of them came. This person was in the middle. All of them had stones and rocks and whatever in their hands to pat this individual. Nabi Isa says, the condition is anyone can hit this individual and punish him. Only that individual can hit and punish who himself has not committed a sin in this life. All of them protestants. They said, we realized that Nabi Isa was trying to teach us a lesson. When I look down upon other people, am I ma'soom? Am I infallible? Have I never committed a sin in my life that I look down upon other individuals? Those women in this verse who looked down upon Zulaykha, they themselves had fallen into this trap worse than Zulaykha had fallen into the trap. And this was the second understanding of this verse, that those women were very quick to use their tongue. We are also very quick to use our tongue to comment on other things. Mufassirin, when dealing with this verse, taking this discussion forward, they say very interestingly that the reason why Nabi Yusuf was placed in the jail and the reason why he was taken out of the jail, if you look at that in history, you will find very interesting secrets for this life. The reason why Nabi Yusuf was placed in the jail was why? When all of these women wrote to him, all of these women said to him, come to our house tonight, that same day. When all of these women wrote to him, Nabi Yusuf prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, Ya Allah, I would rather be in the jail than be a free man. As a free man, I find it very difficult to stay away from this sin. So Ya Allah, I would rather be imprisoned than be a free man and have to deal with these individuals, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala imprisoned him. Mufassirin, ulama, they say, look, the reason why he was imprisoned was his beauty. The reason why he came out of jail was what? was his knowledge. As we know in the story of Nabi Yusuf, when he interprets the dream with his knowledge, he comes out of the jail. The reason why he came into the jail was his beauty. The reason why he came out of the jail was ilm and knowledge. In other words, the reason why sometimes in this world, beauty is not a bad thing. Man harrama zinata Allah allati akhraja li ibadihi. Of course, beauty is not a bad thing. خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ. Beauty is not a bad thing. But this verse showed us that everything to do with this world will cause you difficulty in this world. However, if an individual has ilm, he will have ease in this world and the hereafter. That the reason he comes into the jail is beauty, something of this world, something physical. The reason he comes out of the jail is his ilm. And so the Mufassirin say that the third thing with this verse is that it highlights to us the importance of any individual having knowledge in his life. Often people ask, what is the way that I can be successful in this world? In other words, for example, we have youth, they want to have a goal. What should I be aiming towards? Should I be aiming towards money? Should I be aiming towards this? What should I try and gain in my life? This answer was given to us by the Ummah when they quoted this or part of the story of Nabi Sulaiman. This hadith, Nabi Sulaiman, salamullah alayhi, as we know, had hukuma, had governorship. His governorship was so great, we are told more than half of the world was overtaken by the governorship of Nabi Sulaiman. And our hadith tell us, never in the world has someone had such a large hukuma and governorship over the world, and the only person that will have a greater governorship is none other than Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman, Ajjallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. His governorship was very great, expensive, vast. Books mention the number of horses he had, the number of jinns behind him, the number of countries that he ruled. Before he became king of this world, he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, Ya Allah, I want to be a governor of this world, I want governorship, I want hukuma. I want to rule this world, I have this wish in my heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whenever I gift one of my servants a certain thing, first I will test him. When I gift Nabi Ibrahim, for example, with imama and leadership, inni ja'iluka linnasi imama, first I tested him 70 times. Whenever I gift any of my servants, this is a rule, whether it be a prophet or a rasul or an imam, whether it be me or you, whenever Allah gifts us with something, first He will test us. For example, you ask Allah for knowledge. If you ask Allah for knowledge, first He will test you. Can you handle this knowledge? You ask Allah for rizq, first He will test you. Can you handle this rizq? Then He gives it to you. Nabi Sulaiman was told by Allah, whenever I grant my servant anything, first I will test him. I will test you first, Sulaiman. Nabi Sulaiman says, no problem. Jibreel descends down. Jibreel says, Sulaiman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked you to choose from one of these three things. Either you choose hukuma, governorship, what he wanted, or you choose mal, wealth, or you choose ilm, knowledge. One of these three things you can choose. You can't have two, you can't have three, you can only have one. Either you choose hukuma, governorship, or you choose mal, wealth, or you choose ilm. He says, Jibreel, initially I wanted governorship, hukuma. But now that ilm is in the question, of course I will choose ilm, of course I will choose knowledge. He says, give me knowledge. When he says, give me knowledge, Jibreel tells hukuma and mal, governorship and wealth, go away. Sulaiman has chosen ilm, we don't need you. Both of them reply by saying, Ya Jibreel, where shall we go? Because we have been told by Allah, wherever ilm is found, we should also be found with that individual. In other words, if an individual has knowledge according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, automatically the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that individual will be given wealth in this world, that individual will be given power and hukuma in this world. The center point is that if you have ilm and knowledge, the other things will come automatically. The reason why Nabi Yusuf comes out of the prison, the reason why he becomes the emperor, the king later on, and has a lot of wealth is solely because of the ilm that he had. Solely. And how people were linked with ilm, how people had love for ilm. Any individual, this is my guarantee, any individual that is successful in this world, it is because of the knowledge that they have. Because if a person is jahil, as Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi has said, Al-jahlu aslu kulli shar. Look in the world today, every single evil you find, every single imperfection you find in this world, Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam have said the root of every single evil, the root of every single imperfection is jahl, is ignorance. If there is no ignorance, there is no ISIS, there is no Daesh. If there is no ignorance, there are no groups of terrorists. If there is no ignorance, there are none of this shar and evil in this world. How people have been linked with this ilm and have become successful. Any individual who you see is successful, it is because of their knowledge, without a doubt. And that's not just a degree. Some people think a degree is knowledge. No. True hikmah, when it comes into the heart of an individual, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I raise up that individual. Allah is the one to raise. People think, if I don't have a degree, how will I be employed? If you have true ilm, yes, have degrees, study, this is very good. But if you have true ilm, Allah says, I will raise you up. I am the one to give you rizq. I will give you one example. All of you have heard of Ayatollah al-Uzma al-Marhum, Sayyid Abu al-Qasim al-Khoui, Rahmatullahi alayhi, Zaim of Hawza al-Miya Najaf. Sayyid Khoui says himself, when I was young, 8 or 9 years old, I would read, he mentions himself, I would read at the age of 8 or 9, 18 hours in one day. 18 hours. This individual, whose effect on taqleed, marji'iyya, ijtihad, fiqh, usul al-fiqh is absolutely amazing. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised him up, and the other ulama are the same. If you look at the other ulama that have been raised up, why? Why are they still remembered till today? Sayyid Khoui, one quick example. Sayyid Khoui was unwell. He would teach his Bahad Kharij and other lessons in the day, in one every single day. He was unwell towards the end of his life. The doctor said to him, look, you have to relax to the end of your life, you are unwell, you have to relax. You are teaching a lot, you are reading a lot, you are studying a lot, reduce this. Only stay in the bed, it will have an effect on your health. You have to relax. So, okay. When he returned, maybe after 2, 3, 4 weeks for the second checkup, the doctors were angry with him. Because we are not happy with you. This is why we have been told you are reading more and researching more now than we had told you before. We had told you to rest and relax. After that, we have been told your workload has increased. He says, what do you mean? You had told me to relax. He says, yes. Go to the bed, relax, lie down. He says, no, you had told me to relax. I only feel relaxed when I am reading a hadith or researching traditions of Ahlul Bayt. When someone is linked with this ilm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala automatically raises up that individual. That they then don't have to think about money, Allah will afford for them that money. They don't have to think about power and being famous, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow them to be remembered for the rest of their life. But the main thing for them to have in this world is what? Is for them to have ilm and knowledge. And this was one of the things mentioned about this verse. One of the most important parts of this verse, and why this verse is important in our theology, of the cutting of the fingers when they saw the beauty of Nabi Yusuf, is that ulama, especially those ulama who are experts in mysticism and ethics, they say, look, when those individuals, those women saw the physical beauty of Nabi Yusuf, the veils of their body were removed, they saw nothing but the beauty of Yusuf. In the same way, when someone sees the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the veils of this world are removed. This verse, till today, look in the books of Gnosis and ethics and mysticism, this verse is very important, because this verse shows us in the way that when you see beauty, you forget yourself, all you see is the beauty of that individual. If you were to see the true beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you were to see the true beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your heart, in the same way they forgot themselves, they were cutting their fingers, they did not feel anything. This world of multiplicity, of kathra, would mean nothing for you. Which is why this verse is one of the proofs of as-safaru min al-khalqi ila al-haq. Moving from multiplicity and kathra and the physical world and going to what? And going to nothing but oneness and tawheed. Because they are individuals, they are in this world, but all they see is the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Amirul Mu'mineen Salamullah alayhi, for example, is in sajda and they take out the arrow and he does not feel this. Why? Because of this verse. When you see beauty, you do not feel anything in this world. Amirul Mu'mineen sees the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How can he feel anything in his salah? His body means nothing for him when he has seen the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This verse was important for this reason, that when my eyes see physical beauty, I'm not in my senses. This world is out of me. In the same way, when my heart sees beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the true beauty, this world and its veils are removed from an individual. If we want to understand the Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam, this is the verse you understand Ahlul Bayt. That they say, the wives of the Prophet of Islam sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, if we can have a second salawat for Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman. A third salawat in honor of Sayyidah Fatimah al-Zahra salamullahi alayhi. The Prophet of Islam, his wives say, his wives that lived with him in his life, morning, daytime, when he is sleeping, when he is awake, they are always there. They said when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi would stand for prayer, his face was such, his mannerism was such that it felt like he did not recognize us and we did not recognize him. Because when Rasulullah, when Aimma, when Ahlul Bayt see the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this world means nothing for them. They are not in this world. The multiplicity of this world is not in their eyes. All they see is Tawheed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Which is why in Munajat of Sha'baniyah, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Ilahi habli kamal al-inqita' ilayk. Ya Allah, grant me complete inqita'. Inqita' is I cut away from everything other than you, Ya Allah. This was the state of Ahlul Bayt alayhi wasalam. That Imam al-Sadiq himself says, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's light, the radiance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love falls on the heart of an individual who is sincere, he forgets everything, all he remembers is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single thing is forgotten. The pain of this world is nothing for that individual. They have seen the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the way that they would cut their fingers whilst looking at the beauty of Yusuf, when people see the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the finger of sleep is cut. They do not feel sleep. They wake up in the middle of the night to do ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The finger of wealth is cut. If they lose wealth, it does not matter for them. This is why Ahlul Bayt alayhi wasallam would give their wealth all away a few times in their life. The finger of health is cut by these individuals. All they see is the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An example was given that there was a scholar, a mystic, a person who had worked on himself. He was praying in the middle of the night, Salatul Layl. The Prophet of Islam sallallahu alayhi wa by the way says that one of the things that Jibreel came to me and told me to do so often, I thought it would become wajib. There are 2 or 3 things. For example, Jibreel had told me so many times about brushing the teeth, I thought it would become wajib. Jibreel told me so many times about the rights of the neighbors, I thought it would become wajib to include them in my inheritance. The third thing that Jibreel came to me so many times to tell the people, and I thought it would become wajib, was Salatul Layl, the prayer in the night time. This scholar says, I was praying in the night time, in the darkness of the night. I was praying salah, and there was a candle which I used just to give me enough light to pray, and there was a moth. And I looked at this candle, and I saw that in between my prayers I sat down, that this moth goes to part of the candle, and all of the right wing of the moth was burnt. It hit the flames, it was burnt, it fell onto the ground. After 1 or 2 minutes, it gets back up, it goes back to this candle. This time it burns all of its left wing. It says, I stopped. I realized this is what we understand by true love, this is what we understand by true beauty. That the pain is no longer affecting this moth. All the moth wants is to be close to that thing which it loves, close to the beauty of this flame. This is what this verse actually shows us. When the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in front of me, this body therefore means nothing. So when people ask, how did Imam Hoseine salamullah alayhi give his life on the 10th of Muharram, we say this is the answer. When they saw the face of Nabi Yusuf, they cut their fingers, they did not feel the pain, or they were able to bear the pain. Imam Hoseine saw nothing but beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the arrow hit him, he said, bring on the other arrows as well. When people ask about why Fatimah al-Zahra salamullahi alayha came in front of the door when she is carrying Muhsin, this is the same reason. The same reason. that she has seen the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This body for us, yes, they feel the pain. Yes, giving them pain is one of the greatest injustice. They feel the pain, of course they do. But when they see the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hijab of this body, the hijab, the veil of this world is removed from them because the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in front of them. When she sees the beauty of Allah, when she has seen the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's religion, and she sees people coming to the door to try and attack the representative of this religion, she comes in front of them. Because all she sees is beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She does not see that I am carrying Muhsin. She does not see that I am in front of the door. She sees my beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in my heart. I need to protect this beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This verse of Quran, of Surah Yusuf, was one of the ways in which we understood sacrifices of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. They see the face of Yusuf, they cut their fingers, they handle the pain. Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam saw the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why they say in Imam Hoseine salamullah alayhi, as more wounds were on his body, the look of contentment on his face increased. Because all he sees is beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sees nothing else. The veil of this body has long gone from Imam Hoseine salamullah alayhi. This was one of the most important messages of this verse. And the final message of this verse, I want everyone to pay attention to this. The final message of this verse, when those women saw Nabi Yusuf, what did they say? Hasha lillah. They saw Nabi Yusuf, they remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They saw the beauty of Allah, of Nabi Yusuf. They said, if Yusuf is this beautiful, how beautiful must be the Lord that created this Yusuf. In other words, this verse also told us that sometimes human beings can take us directly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If someone asks us, for example, why do you remember Fatima Zahra in these days? Because in the way that Nabi Yusuf's beauty reminded them of the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we remember Fatima Zahra, her beautiful character and morals reminds us of the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the same way. In exactly the same way. They saw Nabi Yusuf, they said, Hasha lillah, how great is this Allah? We mention Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha. We mention the beauty of Fatima Zahra. We mention the greatness of Fatima Zahra. In the same way we think, how great is this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that gave us a role model that like Sayyidina Zahra salamullahi alayha. When she had seen the beauty of Allah, this world was not in her mind. They say, for example, one hand would be rocking the cradle of Imam Hassan or Imam Hussein. The other hand she would be cooking food. She would be sleeping at the same time. Look at how the veils have been removed. She would be sleeping at the same time. Fitna said, but I still saw her mentioning Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Because the veils have been removed from Fatima Zahra. She sees nothing but beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is this woman, again you find a very interesting comparison from Nabi Yusuf and Sayyidina Zahra. Nabi Yusuf, when he was in the prison, the people in the prison told him, oh Yusuf, you are crying too much for your father Yaqub. He missed Yaqub. You are crying too much for your father Yaqub. Either you cry in the morning and don't cry in the night time, or you cry one day and you do not cry the other day. In the same way that Nabi Yusuf was told to cry one day and not cry the other day for his father, Zahra was told by the people of Medina, cry one day for Rasulullah, don't cry another day. We are unable to sleep. Zahra, you are crying too much. The Masahib of Fatima Zahra salamullahi alayha begins with the death of Rasulullah. Begins with the passing of Rasulullah. In these days, inshallah, we mention a different Masahib. And the Masahib of the door and the miscarriage of Muhsin and her shahada will come afterwards. Today we mention the Masahib of her crying for her father Rasulullah. Because when you take a fish out of water, what happens? The fish passes away. You separate Fatima Zahra from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi in the same way. And that's why we are told, Imam Baqir mentions the 5 people who in history were al-Bakka'un. The 5 people that were al-Bakka'un. Al-Bakka'un means they wept and wept profusely. Never in history have people wept more than these 5 individuals. Imam Baqir salamullahi alayhi tells his companion, he says, Ya ashabi and his companions. The first individual who would cry and weep, and who is one of the Bakkaun, is Nabi Adam when he sees the body of Habil, because they say Habil was hit on his head, and Nabi Adam says, I would remember the wound on the head of Habil. One day Nabi Adam says, I was crying for my son Habil. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I sent down Jibreel. I said, Jibreel, tell him, you have lost your son, but you did not lose your son in the way that my Hoseine had lost his son Ali al-Akbar. Oh Adam, you lost your son Habil, but do you not know the son of the grandson of Rasulullah Hoseine? He will lose his son Ali al-Akbar. Imam Baqir says the second person that was min al-Bakkaun was Nabi Yaqub, who would cry, as the Quran says, وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ, who cried for many years for Nabi Yusuf, 30, 40, 50 years in his life. The third person, he says, was Nabi Yusuf. For 20 years in his life, he cries for the separation from his father Yaqub. Then Imam Baqir says the fourth individual who is min al-Bakkaun is my father Sayyid al-Sajjad, who would cry for his father Abu Abdullah Al-Hoseine. They say one day in Medina an individual comes into Medina. As this individual comes into Medina, he is thirsty, he is tired, he is hungry. He says, Ana al-Gharib, Ana al-Adshan, I am the foreigner, I am the poor individual, I am thirsty. Imam Sajjad hears him saying these things. Imam Sajjad begins to cry, Wa Husayna, wa madluma. Imam Sajjad tells that individual, if you were to die now, would someone give you ghusl? Would someone give you kafan? Would someone bury your body? He says, yes, ya ibn Rasulullah. Imam Sajjad says, then you are not gharib, for the real gharib was my father Abu Abdullah, who was not given ghusl, was not given kafan. Imam Baqir says, and the fifth individual who is min al-Bakkaun is our mother Fatimah al-Zahra. The individual says, yes, but Yusuf cried for 20 years, Yaqub cried for 25 years, all of them cried for many years in their life. Zahra did not cry for that long in her life. Imam Baqir says, but do you not know every single time she would cry, once the hairs of Zahra would turn white. This is the way that Zahra would cry for Rasulullah. That Shaykh Abbas Qummi says, when people came to Amirul Mu'mineen and they said, Amirul Mu'mineen, tell Zahra to cry one day and not cry the other. Shaykh Abbas Qummi says, how did the people of Medina know that Zahra was crying? Did they hear the voice of Zahra? He says, no, they did not hear the voice of Zahra. Rather, every time Zahra would cry out, the ground would begin to shake, as if her father was turning in his grave, hearing the sound of Zahra crying, Wa Muhammadan, Muhammadan. Zahra is told by Amirul Mu'mineen, people are being disturbed by your crying. They say Zahra takes Hassan in one hand, Hussein in another hand. She says, I went to the outskirts of Medina, I would sit under a tree and I would cry for my father Rasulullah. One individual saw me crying under this tree. The next day I came, he had cut this tree. So Zahra says, I sat in the sun crying for my father Rasulullah. Amirul Mu'mineen says, when I heard Zahra was crying in the sun, I made for her Baytul Huzn, where she would cry and she would say, Subbat alayya masaibun law annaha subbat ala al-ayami sarna layaliya. Ya Rasulullah, my father, after you have left me, the masaib that fell on me, if they fell on the day would turn into night. They say when Rasulullah was in his last moments, Zara says, I was sitting next to the body of Rasulullah, he was in his last moments. I was saying, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِ الرُّسُولِ أَفَإِنْ مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انقلبتم على أعقابكم. As I was mentioning this verse of Quran, I hear a knock on the door. When I hear a knock on the door, I went to the door. I said, who is it? The reply came, I am the angel of death. I am Malakul Maut. What do you want? He replies, I want permission to enter to take the soul of Rasulullah. Malakul Maut says, I entered through this door after gaining the permission from Fatima to Zara. They say, Ya Zara, when Rasulullah is here, Malakul Maut asks for permission to enter your door. But after Rasulullah goes, how do they enter your door? And they say, Ya Fatima, Rasulullah is on his deathbed. Amirul Mu'mineen gives ghusl and kafan to Rasulullah. Lakin yawm al-ashir min al-Muharram, Zahra sees the way in which the Rasulullah is given ghusl and kafan, but she also sees the way in which they deal with her son Aba Abdullah Al-Hoseine, because they say when Aba Abdullah Al-Hoseine is on the plains of Karbala and Shimr is on the chest of Aba Abdullah, والشمر جالس على صدر الحسين. Shimr says, every time I would take my knife on the neck of Hussein, I would hear a woman whispering in my ears. This woman would say, Waladi, Waladi, qataluka atshana. Oh my son, they are killing you whilst you are thirsty. Shimr says, I tried to cut the neck of Aba Abdullah, and I heard a call from the sky saying, Ya Zahra, leave the body of Hussein, because if you do not leave the body of Aba Abdullah, Allah will cause Qiyamah to come at this point. Allah la'natullah على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون